All right, y'all. So my name is Brianna Simmons. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm joining from Denver, Colorado. I've been based here for about 5 years, but I'm originally from Kansas City, Missouri. Here I work as the Black Maternal Health Healing and Joy Coordinator for Soul to Soul Sisters. I'm also a full spectrum doula, organizer, creative, among many things. I would love to introduce or have our panelists actually introduce themselves. Janae, Jonathan, who wants to get started?
Go ahead, Janae.
I knew you were going to say that. Okay, I can start. My name is Janae Strong Doe. I am a mother and healer, also community organizer. I've been working in the space for upwards of about 10 years. I'm based in Chicago, and I am really just looking forward to having this space to share some things around healing and joy, which is really needed at this time, just as equally and as important as our resistance.
My name is Jonathan Likes. I'm the executive director of liberationhouse.org and a co-founder of Black Youth Project 100. I'm also curator for the Black Joy Experience. So I encourage you all to follow me on Instagram at j.lykes, j.likes, if you want to tap into some joy with me at some point.
Beautiful. So glad that the two of you are joining us. A lot of people are excited about this conversation. A lot of people are feeling the need to either revisit or get started in their own personal healing practices. And so to get the conversation going, I'm wondering if the two of you can talk about your relationship with one another, how you all have, how you all know each other via movement work or whatever it might be. Let us know.
Go ahead, Jade.
Okay, so we're not gonna do that too many more times. So yeah, Jonathan and I, we actually know each other from before we started college. We both were living at Cleveland at the time. Shout out to Cleveland. And we spent a summer together basically preparing for the next chapter, which was gonna be living in Chicago. And then that was kind of our first kind of fated meeting. And then the next step of our fated relationship was the acquittal of George Zimmerman and the birth of BYP 100. And so we both were founding members of that organization and spent a great deal, even up to presently, working in movement space, doing direct action organizing, political education. But a really important piece of our relationship that relates to this panel today is that we actually were also some of the members who started some really pivotal kind of work in BYP 100 and the Movement for Black Lives Space, where we're dealing with healing and also cultural organizing as creating a space for our holistic selves as Black people. And so I can just say the first iteration of that work was with the Healing and Safety Council, and what that work was about really and truly was about trying to proactively create spaces for us to center our well-being, our healing, our self-care, and our collective care. In the face of consistently organizing, strategizing, and being interfaced with police violence, state violence, and also the interpersonal violence that stems from the systemic violence. So that was the first kind of piece of work that I saw and was really proud to be a part of within our iteration of Black Millennials, to say that we're actually going to take a forward step to actually center ourselves and center our healing, as opposed to sacrificing ourselves to the movement. We're actually going to try to take care of ourselves and take care of one another. And then a little bit later, maybe a year or two later, Jonathan actually started to say, you know, we do this holistic practice and we have the holistic healing energy within our collective, but let's actually name it. Let's actually put it within a historical framework, and let's actually start to produce the movement, music, and the beat of the drum, if you will, to our resistance. And that's another piece of work that I was really proud to see as a friend and a comrade, but also as someone who really needed it, as someone who's movement organizing, but also am a Black woman, a queer person, a mother, you know, just really needing to have something to sustain. So that's kind of how work and family and love and friendship has continued to put us in space, and it's been really, really beautiful.
Definitely. So Janae and I go way back, literally met at like 18. So it's been a good 12 years of best friendship. And I think, you know, we are living and interweaving our connection into the history of the Black radical tradition. Coming out of the Black radical tradition is a necessity for healing justice. So not just spaces that respond to trauma and respond to like trauma-informed analyses, but how are we building spaces to radically heal from hurt and harm? And how are we creating spaces that allow us to formulate new cultural production that allows us to experience joy and love and family and appreciation and a centering that we all need in this world? So in many ways, Janae and I have been living parallel lives to go kind of in depth into these concepts and ideas, but also to spread these concepts and ideas to the world. So I just posted a couple links in the chat box. The first one was BYP 100 Stay Woke, Stay Whole Healing Manual. There's so many good nuggets of work. Shout out to Janae for being a co-writer of that product. The second link I sent you all is the Black Joy Experience Resource Guide, which I wrote along with a colleague, Fresco Stees, which kind of covers BYP 100's holistic energy work. When we say holistic energy, it is the process of being able to come to liberation spaces with our full and entire selves. So often this world only asks for pieces of our identity, only asks for pieces of our wholeness, and doesn't want to deal with the fullness of who we are and the complexities and nuances of who we are as Black people living radically in this world. So we know if we want to get to liberation together, it's actually a requirement for us to be able to bring our full selves to that work that's getting us closer to liberation. And then the last link is song.link/Black Joy Experience is a link to stream the Black Joy Experience album on all platforms. And maybe at some point during this call, we will play for you all the healing music video. There's a song on the album titled Healing, most appropriate for this panel discussion. So I will stop there.
Yes, please. That's beautiful. To the attendees, if you have any questions at any time, just go ahead and pop those in the chat and we'll be sure to make sure your questions get answered. Janae and Jonathan, thank you so much for that opening. It's a beautiful introduction to your relationship and the work that you all have been doing together. I have a lot of questions actually from that, but I think what stood out to me most is actually what you ended off with, Jonathan, is that like coming to movement work, you know, we're asked for our labor, right? And often we aren't invited to be our whole selves, and to do so, to show up radically as our whole selves is liberation right now. And so I'm curious, when we talk about healing justice, what does that look like for you personally, both inside movement work and outside of that?
So healing justice for me really looks like being able to, when I come into movement, I know that within movement spaces, we have all been harmed, either interpersonal harm, or we're all continuously being harmed by the state. So healing justice is how do we all together as a collective get to a place where we all can be healed, where we all can respond to harm in ways that doesn't recreate state punishment. Essentially, the state's solution to harm is just throwing people in cages. So how do we not repeat the punishment lens that exists in a state violent framing? and how do we get to a space of healing in ways that make us better, in ways that center the person who is the person being harmed. How do we center the victims of harm in these spaces, while not disposing of the people who are doing the harm? Because at some point we have all harmed someone else. So I think, this relates to like ideas around abolition and fund Black community campaigns happening around the country right now. But it really is a new way of being with each other in society, that allows us to come to these spaces complex and nuanced ways that allow us to struggle through harm and get to a place of healing without disposing of each other and without recreating state violence on each other.
And I'll just add, just from a personal standpoint, I know this like current iteration of uprising and movement was a bit of a challenge for me because, a couple of years ago, Jonathan and I were both like consistently confronting the state, consistently taking the risk of being arrested, consistently taking the risk of being harmed physically. And in this iteration, in that iteration, I had a child still, but I had like one child, and now I have two children. So just thinking about the personal kind of stakes in people's risk and threshold, and like how people show up. I really love to think of healing justice as a formation of folks who have intricate number of sets of skills, identities, experiences, that can be leveraged to support the collective whole. And I think that's been the most beautiful thing that I've learned a part of being in movement space, is that there is a collective, there is a support, there is a net, if you will, that Black people, Indigenous people of color, queer folks can fall into, because we all understand that the state and the violence and the harm and the stress and the mental health challenges are relentless. And so for me, healing justice is about really leaning into what that beloved community not only could be in our radical imagination, but what it actively is and what it actively has been. And so for me, a really useful piece of language has been this conversation around being in right relationship, and really wanted to be in right relationship with myself, really wanted to be in right relationship with the land, really wanted to be in right relationship with my inner child, so that I can be in relationship with my children that are now, coming into this world and learning this world. And so when I think about healing justice, I know I would call Jonathan, FaceTime him like every week, like, hey, you still out there protesting? Make sure you drink some ginger and some turmeric, make sure you take care of yourself, because we're all going to be doing different things. And I know for his spirit and for his soul, he needs to be out there. He needs to be still confronting that. And I know for my spirit and my soul, I need to be at home with my children and completely shut the world out for a couple of days. And that is the beauty of this collective and this holistic kind of continuity throughout the healing and the joy and even the resistance, is that folks can step up and step back as needed. And what I really feel the goals of just like the healing justice that I've seen and experienced, not only in theory, but like what I've actually experienced in practice, is that that whole self, whoever person that is in that collective, that whole self is honored, and that whole self can change and shift and show up in all the different facets that are there at different moments. And that's the really beautiful piece, is to have, through resistance, this new found deeper community where you can actually bring all that to the table.
Yeah, and I'm also hearing like just it's a challenge to hold yourself accountable, as well as hold your community accountable to being well, while doing the work. Um, yeah. So and on that same note, as far as talking about your beloved community, I'm curious, who taught the two of you about healing and joy, and how that can be used within movement work for liberation?
Definitely through principled struggle within the movement for Black lives. Janae and my political home is still Black Youth Project 100, but over the past 7 to 10 years, we've been able to interact with so many people across different spectrums of this movement. But I really think it was struggling with each other within the BYP 100 space that taught me most of my framing and understanding of healing justice, and really my framing around radical joy and how to sustain radical joy in movement spaces. BYP 100 back in 2015 created the National Healing and Safety Council as an experiment of what do we do when harm takes place and we're abolitionists. So if we're not calling the police, then we actually need to be creating new systems of liberation that actually work for our people to keep us free, to keep us whole, and to keep us safe. Um, so there's so many stories and examples and narratives that come out of the healing justice space. I encourage you all to check out the Stay Woke, Stay Whole manual, to check out some of the examples and some of the frameworks we've used in that space. But my encouragement to everyone is to seek alternatives to current systems of oppression. Seek or create. Many alternatives are already in existence in our society. So I'm a part of a community called the House and Ballroom community. I'm in the House of Garçon. This is a community that's about a century old. It started in the 1920s out of the Harlem Renaissance and Harlem drag balls. And many folks might know House Ballroom community from maybe Paris is Burning or Pose or the new show Legendary that's on HBO. But this is a space that literally is an example of like created by Black trans women, let's be clear, like what it is rooted in. But this is a space that's literally an example of folks saying, yeah, even the best of these government systems that try to help us end up harming us more than helping us. So what do we do in order to create something that actually works for our people? And House and Ballroom has been doing that for a century, and many people have still never even heard of them. Or if they have heard of House and Ballroom, it's through the lens of voguing and dancing, which is important cultural production. That's my jam all day. But this is literally a community that recreates their families and recreates structures in order to thrive and survive in this world, in order to be healed in a world that doesn't want to see Black, queer, and trans people heal and whole and safe and held. So yeah, I encourage folks like create something, experiment with some shit, or join some shit that is an alternative to the world we're living in. Because that will be the quickest way for us to experience freedom, experience liberation, even in the midst of navigating systemic oppression and white supremacy.
Well said. No, absolutely. I love that. And I think a good framework to work with is like the dominant culture or the mainstream narrative is violence. If the dominant culture is isolation, then the subculture is togetherness. If the dominant culture is violence, then the subculture is safety, right? And so like, as long as there's a dominant culture that is harmful, there's always going to be pockets of subcultures that have a historical kind of like genesis of continuing to survive and also thrive. And if the dominant culture is violence, if the dominant culture is isolation, if the dominant culture is fear and uncertainty, then the outcome of that dominant culture is always going to be death. And we say that we always, always, always are proponents of life and living fully and living in your fullest self and with the wholeness of your personhood, and that all of that is welcome and accepted. So any of these communities that Jonathan named are deeply committed to that work. And I also echo that in terms of more communities. I've been working with mothers who here in Chicago who have children who were wrongfully convicted and or tortured as a part of the regime of John Burge in Chicago and those tortures. And these mothers have, some of their children have been out of prison upwards of 20 years, and they are still committed to the collective, going to each other's court sessions, writing to the governors, writing to legislators, meeting together. We're actually in the process of putting together a wellness curriculum that's based on their strategies that they already employ, but positioning them as experts. And so just the main point in that is that what I love about this community and what I've learned about healing is something that is even something that is stronger and bigger and deeper than I even learned with my own family, right? Because we're all seeped in with it. We're all seeped in this culture. And it's only when I've been in community with other folks who are crazy enough to be like, you know what, we're going to say this is not okay. You know, it's only when I've been in those communities that I've been able to experience or even touch just the beginnings or just different levels or different opportunities to feel and experience healing and love. And I just kind of frame it in one story that was really, really powerful to me. When we first started BYP 100, we would say, like, every time we get together, it feels like a spiritual gathering. It feels like there's some type of spiritual energy in the air. Like, we were just like really trying to name it. And that's really where holistic energy came from, as us naming it as one of our principles. And there was one such meeting. We were in Atlanta, and C Freedom, who is a comrade of ours from New Orleans, Louisiana, she introduced us to this chant called Ancestors Watching. And we were there in the room with like only candlelight, and we're like, you know, doing this chant together. And then years later, when in Chicago, we were resisting the International Chief of Police Conference, and we successfully shut that down. When we were all getting arrested, about 50 to 65, some odd of us were getting arrested. We sang again, we chanted again, Ancestors Watching. And it was just this energy of being firmly and deeply rooted in a sense of purpose, and being completely okay with whatever may come. We're on the right side of history, and there's actually a deep feeling of power, purpose, and joy that comes from being able to resist. And then, you know, being able to wait to have folks, once we get out of jail, we get out of holding, everyone waits for everyone to get out. And then after that, to like have a big turn up, right? Like all of those iterations have been really deeply impactful to me in terms of understanding what healing could feel like. It's not the absence of conflict. It's not the absence of harm. It's not the absence of, you know, pain. None of us are impervious to those things, but there's always a community to belong to.
So on that note, we're going to do the Ancestors Watching chant together now. I'm going to invite you to be vulnerable wherever you are and do this chant aloud, regardless of where you are or who's watching. Let them think you're weird. That's fine. But I'm going to teach you this chant. We're going to do it together. And then at the end of the chant, we're actually going to type in the chat box the ancestor that we want to bring into this space. So it is of my belief, it is of the practice of Black Youth Project 100 and Liberation House, that we are all standing in a lineage of all of those who came before us and all of those who will come after us. I repeat that. We are all standing in a lineage of all of those who came before us and all of those who will come after us. So now I encourage you to take 10 seconds to place the name of an ancestor in your head right now. This ancestor could be someone like Ella Baker, Fannie Lou Hamer, Harriet Tubman, Audre Lorde. This ancestor could be your grandmother, your great-grandparents, your great-great-grandparents. This ancestor could be maybe someone you lost this year from COVID. Take 2 more seconds to place the name of that person in your head. I'm going to teach you this chant. It's very simple. I'll do it once and then we will all do it together. And this is how it goes. Ancestors watching, I know they're watching. Ancestors watching, I know, I know. Ancestors watching, I know they're watching. Ancestors watching, I know, I know. All right, it's very simple. We will do a couple rounds of that all together. And then when I close out the chant, type the name of your ancestors in the chat box. All right, 1, 2, 3, and ancestors watching, I know they're watching. Ancestors watching, I know, I know. Ancestors watching, I know. They're watching. Ancestors watching, I know. I know. Ancestors watching, I know. They're watching. Ancestors watching, I know. I know. Ancestors watching, I know. They're watching. Ancestors watching, I know. I know. Ancestors watching, I know. They're watching. Ancestors watching, I know. I know. Ancestors watching, I know. They're watching. Ancestors watching, I know. I know. One more time. Ancestors watching, I know. They're watching. Ancestors watching, I know. I know. Ancestors watching, I know. They're watching. Ancestors watching, I know. I know. Everybody take a deep breath in. Exhale together. Take another deep breath in. And exhale together. So now, please, we would love to know the ancestors that you have brought with you on our journey here today. Please type them in the chat box and I'll read them aloud. Thank you, Jessica. My ancestor watching, Paul Tully. Thank you. Mary Price. Thank you, Annie. The ancestor I was bringing today, I always conjure up some Ella Baker. Bert Strauss, Lillian and Nat Appleman, Balkis Jabber, Ethel Love Seven, Kimberly Simmons. Okay. So the final thing I want to ask you all, for those still engaged with us, we started talking about holistic energy at the top of this call and this idea of shifting energy in movement spaces so that we can come to these spaces with our full and entire selves. My request now is to list one word in the chat box of how your energy has shifted from the start of Ancestors Watching to now. Just one word about how your energy has shifted from the start of Ancestors Watching until now. I think it's important for us to name that there is no scientific process to get us to a place of holistic energy. There's not a random controlled trial we can go through to get to holistic energy. There's not a results-based accountability process that will get us to holistic energy. This is the spirit work of our time. So I hear some folks saying they feel calmer, peaceful, grounded, embraced, held. Thank you all for those words. We've experienced, and I can't even see y'all faces. We have experienced on this call the process of holistic energy, the process of shifting energy so that we all can come to this work more prepared to get to liberation together. And Jessica, thank you for your comment saying, my grandmother's always present and witnessing too. They don't want to be left out. Dina and Lillian. Thank you. Thank you, Jessica. So I'll pass it back to you, Brianna.
That was beautiful. Thank you for that. Yeah, when you talk about the spirit work of our time, I kind of want to go down that road for a second. Because a lot of people from various movements, from various eras, um, did what they had to do, and they did it in a different way. not right or wrong. They just did it in a different way. And I feel that the healing justice piece of the movement work that we are living in this time has an element of spiritual work that calls back to previous generations, calls back to our ancestors, and looks forward, like where are we going and how are we going to be when we arrive there, in that place. So I'm curious, you've thrown out like spirit work and radical joy. I'm just curious what that looks like for you, as far as how are you able to access that in this iteration of the movement, with COVID, with the movement for Black lives taking many different directions as it has recently. Like how does that look like? What does that look like for you? Has it changed? All the
Yeah.
things.
Um, a couple of things come to mind. Um, the first is the idea of faith, and faith being required for this moment more than ever. And to me, faith is the ability to imagine a world that does not currently exist. It is the ability to dream up, to envision, to create an entity, a space that we don't currently have, that is currently not accessible to us. So I feel like because of the three crises we're navigating simultaneously in this moment, because we're navigating a pandemic of proportions our generation and generations before us have never seen, because we are navigating the largest economic crisis since the Great Depression, because we're holding those two things and still navigating 400 years of racism, and still seeing the public lynching, the public suffocation of Black bodies, which is the representation of how white supremacy loves to kill Black folks. They love to take our breath away. Because of all of those things, we need faith now more than ever. We need to be able to imagine a new world. We need to be able to dream up new systems. We need to be able to formulate new ways of living and being and breathing and moving in this world. And you can't do that without faith. You can't do that without this ability, this power that we all hold to dream up something that does not currently exist. That's the first thing that comes to mind. Janae, you wanna add to that?
I was just gonna say I'm gonna jump in, but you had a couple points. I wasn't gonna interrupt you. Fake now. So no, absolutely. And I think just to segue off of that, I draw a lot of strength and a lot of faith and a lot of imagination and like imagination and practice. Like I always want to put those two things in relationship with each other. Like radical imagination is not just about like this kind of like daydreaming. It's actually about constructing an alternative or reaching back to an alternative and practicing it and continuing to experiment and imagine what the final like system of it, like whole system, global system of it could look like. But the actual like implementation of it is now. Like we're not imagining it for later. We're doing it now, and we're imagining how to systematize it globally. And so, what allows me to like stay in that, because quite frankly, there have been periods during this time where I've opted out of like all functioning of life. I'm just like, no, not gonna do this. I'm gonna count my daughter's toes and play this little pig for the whole day, But what has allowed me to like come and be present most days has been my relationship to other Black queer people, and particularly mothers, because we have children. And so one of my big conundrums right now is the state of education and the state of schooling. Just this idea of, okay, my child could go to school, but then they would be in a classroom, social distance with a mask on 8 hours in a day. That is one very not good option. And then there's also the alternative of like remote learning. Some people are doing hybrids. And so it's just like this complete crazy kind of thing that like a couple of days ago, me and a group of about 20 some moms got on a text and were like, are y'all ready to really think about what we're gonna do with our kids this school year? Like as the school year is like 2 weeks away, because it's been like, how do you manage all of these stimuli and all of these questions and all of these things without any models for this time? And so that's what makes this time so unique, that we don't have any models. Like I've talked to a couple of elders and they're like, hey, I can give you some parallels, but no, we haven't been through this one. So it's like really a time where we have to really deepen and like really dig our heels into, all right, well, let's look at this as an opportunity. What do we want to do with our children? And what do we want to do as mothers, as a collective? What have been some things that we maybe been missing, but because we were going through the motions of the way life is as normal, we've been kind of like, you know, saying, not even like outwardly saying, but subconsciously going with the motion that was already prescribed and set out for us. Now we actually have some opportunities to be messy and start to do something different with our kids. And that now becomes a sense of joy and excitement. I'm like, oh, okay, my child doesn't have to be in school 8 days, 8 hours out of the day. My child doesn't have to be told to sit down and be compliant and be quiet and walk in straight lines or whatever, because, you know, the kids in the suburban districts weren't doing that before anyway. So now my child actually has the opportunity to do something different. What can I build and create with other people in community that can be supportive to my child? We can have Uncle John on a Zoom call and do freedom songs and chants for an hour, and that could be social studies, you know, like we can do different things. And so I think that's been what has been giving me faith and giving me some type of unction to continue forward with joy, is that my relationship to my profession, my relationship to work, my relationship to schooling, all my relationships to all these things that have been kind of like set in stone. Even though I've been resisting and like doing these movements and these campaigns, there's actually conditions whereby wholesale, a lot of people are kind of like trying to figure out what to do. And so why not this be the perfect time for those of us who are cultural organizers, those of us who are community organizers and thinkers and dreamers and doers, to say, hey, y'all, let's do this thing over here. You know, like this is the perfect time for us to actually chart a path forward in the right direction. So that's what has been really powerful, really scary still. But the faith piece and the spirit piece and that centering on joy, that taking the deep breaths, that doing the meditation, that calling my homegirl who has kids and be like, hey, do you feel crazy today? Because I feel really crazy today. That community, you know, is what allows me to show up and allows others to show up. And I think that is always kind of the through line when it comes to that work of like healing and joy as power. It's not necessarily a statement of I'm always going to be right or things are always going to go right, but I always have a community where I can laugh to keep from crying, or I can sing when I don't really have an answer, and then get to the strategy.
Yes, thank you. And now is the time. Now definitely is the time for us to be creating that world that we want to raise our kids in. I have just one last question before we open it up to make sure that the attendees have time to get their questions in. Just lay it out for us. I want to know who the two of you are when you are your most joyful, liberated. This is Janae. This is Jonathan. Self. Who is that person? What does it look like when you're smiling from ear to ear and like your heart is full?
When I am my most joyful self, you will find me on a Saturday evening dancing in the mirror and singing new freedom songs that no one has heard before that are coming from my heart and mind. You will find me somewhere smoking a good old blunt and just living my best life.
And we love to see it. Yes. What about you, Janae?
I love it. And I also, can I just name how it's like completely PC now to talk about how we all smoke weed? I just love it. So my most joyful self, and this is gonna be no surprise to Jonathan, but it's barefoot on somebody's land, singing some type of song or writing some type of song. And in my mind and in my heart, I'm actually in West Africa right now. So that's where I am. I'm most happy. Just my children, like we're all just on the coast of West Africa on some land, probably half naked, singing and dancing and being silly. That is truly joy for me. Thank
Yes, we love to see it too. Any questions, anybody? We have just a few more minutes before our panel will be over. Of all of the things that we've talked about today, if you have any questions, please drop it in the chat and we'll make sure that they get answered. And yeah, of course, if there are no questions, we can watch the healing music video.
Cool. So we will play the music video. This is from the Black Joy Experience album. And yeah, we'll play these videos so we can rock out together. But if there are any more questions, please put them in the chat box. Let me just cue up the video. 1 second, y'all. Can y'all see that?
Yes, we can.
All right. Do we have any more questions coming? Nope. All right, we have 2 more minutes, so I'm gonna play a 60-second chant. It's another video called Middle Finger to the Law. I think you all will enjoy this. And
I love that video.
then we will say our goodbyes.
Middle finger to the world. Middle finger to the world. Say no, no to the people. Say no, no to the people. Middle finger to the world. Middle finger to the world. Say no, no to the people. Say no, no to the people. Middle finger to the world. Middle finger to the world. Say no, no to the people. Say no, no to the people. Middle finger to the world. Middle finger to the world. Say no, no to the people. Say no, no to the people.
We lit, as y'all can say. It's a lit year. I do believe 2020 is the worst of times and the best of times for an opportunity to change the world. So all love, y'all.
A couple of people are asking if they can access the video somewhere or the songs.
Yes. If you go to my Instagram page, the videos are on my page. I just posted my link there. But if you can't find them, just message me. I'll send you the link too.
Perfect. Thank you so much, y'all.
Thank you, Brianna. Appreciate you hosting us.
Yeah. And thank you, Brianna.
Yes.
And thank you, Janae. This would not have happened without Janae, y'all.
Right.
Much love.
All right. Yeah, much love. Have a beautiful Saturday. I hope to remember y'all dancing in the mirror later. All
In
right.
West Africa.
Okay.
One day.
Yes.
Bye-bye.